when is vertical integration okay? So I want to look at this from two perspectives. One, when does it make commercial sense to vertically integrate up or down the chain, depending on where you're starting? And then obviously, when is it good for consumers as well? And the first thing to look at, the first rationale for vertically integrating is to reduce costs. The most common example of this is where you think that somebody further up the chain, one of your suppliers, is profit gouging. So you think that you can do what they do for less. And that's certainly part of the thesis of industry funds vertically integrating and going into investments, because they think they can do it for less than what asset managers are willing to do it for. This might also be because there's a big cost of distribution or cost of acquisition further up the chain. And if you're vertically integrated, then you might be able to remove that cost. That's a possibility. So clearly for institutions, there is a case to be made here going into investments. For advice firms, I think the case isn't so clear. The second rationale is to assure supply. So the easiest example of this is Ferrero makes Nutella. They need a lot of hazelnuts. They don't have hazelnuts, that's a problem. And so they own hazelnut processing plants, hazelnut farms, to make sure that they can get their hands on those hazelnuts. This might also apply to big institutions who want access to specific types of investment strategies. They want to make sure they can get the capacity that they need when they need it. It might also apply to the vertically integrated groups who want to make sure they can get for their clients what they need as and when it's required. But for an advisor, I'm less convinced that there's an issue getting hold of the right platform. They're pretty widely available. Managed funds are pretty widely, there are lots of them. There are 12,000 of these things. There doesn't seem to be any shortage. So I'm not sure it applies to the advice part of the value chain. And the third and probably most interesting one is improved coordination. So how does proximity help the different parts of the value chain work better together and produce better outcomes for consumers and for the business as well? So an easy example of this is an insurer and an in-house asset manager. Because they're close together on the same floor in the same building, they can get exactly the type of reporting that they need to manage their asset liability matching exposures. They can get exactly the type of exposure that they need in the portfolio to do exactly what they want and help them manage that really closely. So that improved coordination is a real benefit of vertical integration in that example. It is possible in advice, we think, and there's an opportunity in advice to have an advice process that is unique, requires specific things from a platform that aren't otherwise available, and possibly requires specific things from asset management as well. And so through connecting those things up, you can create a unique proposition for consumers, and arguably it would be more difficult to do that if you weren't all sitting under the same roof. I think this is one where we have to look at ourselves in the mirror a little bit and think about how well have we done here in the past, because we've seen a lot of products being launched by asset managers, and then the advice research folks don't put them on the menu or on the APL because there hasn't been any coordination. But there are some positive examples of this as well. So I think this is an opportunity. This is something that there's a real benefit to vertical integration, but we need to make it work a little bit better. And isn't the real opportunity here and the real difference that vertical integration can make the joining up of the big pools of customers that we have, and then the other things that we can offer them. So who better to understand when our clients need advice and products than banks and super funds? And they can't do that without vertically integrating. So this is the one, we think, that makes the most sense. So if you meet all of these tests, it will be good for the consumer. If we reduce costs, assuming some of that is passed on to the consumer, that is absolutely good. If we assure supply, we can get hold of what we need, what our customers are demanding, that is good for consumers. And if we coordinate well and deliver unique propositions, that is also undoubtedly really good for the consumer. I think there's a bit of a question about whether we've messed up the opportunity to make the most of these through the destruction of some trust, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. And so do the positives outweigh the negatives? The two main negatives are reduced flexibility. So there is no doubt that when you integrate vertically, there is some reduced flexibility. So if there were a big rise in walnut-flavoured chocolate paste, Ferrero is probably going to struggle a little bit because they're unlikely to switch. They own all these hazelnut plants and they're growing hazelnuts every day. They need to do something with them. The best example of this is actually Sony, who had a very, very good MP3 player before the iPod. But such was the pressure on the business to vertically integrate that it only had Sony, the songs on there that Sony had the recording rights to, and it naturally failed. So they gave up on their proposition to integrate. And the second one is reduced specialization. So just because you are very good at one part of the value chain actually doesn't mean you're going to be really good in operating in another part of the value chain. In fact, it's more likely to, or well, it certainly will, and you can't escape the fact that you'll have higher complexity, higher costs. And that reduced specialization, I think, is something to really watch out for, and specialization should be valued quite highly.